If you've got models, then you probably have some leftover sprue sitting around. Being made from the same resin as the models, it's easy to use the same techniques to clean up and alter models on the sprue to create dynamic shapes. Luckily, we won't have to use any advanced techniques for what I'm going to do, as these are some of the regular ways I've used sprue for creating floors. The straightforward method is to find a large section of empty sprue and cut off any remaining arms until you're left with a mostly clean rod. Then begin cutting sections of the rod into square shapes. A pair of snippers will be the easiest means of doing this, though it'll likely leave some messy edges. It can be done with a blade for cleaner cuts, but this will make a tedious job take even longer than it needs to and will quickly wear down your blades. I recommend finding a container to store your bits as you cut them, since there's a good chance you'll exceed what you need and will want to save the leftovers for future bases. Start by gluing a block anywhere on the base, face up or face down. Then glue more pieces along the angled edges, reversing the top and bottom side. Be sure to leave a slight gap between the bricks, otherwise they'll bond into a single piece. Keep building the row until it reaches over the edges of the base. Then start a new row alongside the last row, making sure to offset this new row so as to not make it uniform with the previous row. Continue making rows until the whole base is filled. Now at this point you have a choice as to whether you want to keep the sharp edges of the sprue or if you want them rounded out. If you want to keep things sharp, move on to the next step, but if you want to round them easily, use either a pair of tweezers or pliers to safely hold the base away from your fingers, then use a lighter or candle to pass a flame over the sprue side of the base. Never keep the flame still, just do quick passes or the heat might deform the base itself. Keep checking after every pass under the flame and don't worry if you see wrinkles, we'll clean those off later. Once you're happy with the partially melted appearance of your sprue, we can move on to the next step. Like our previous bases, we flip it over onto our cutting mat and carefully cut the excess sprue hanging over the edges of the base. Due to the sprue's thickness, you may have to take multiple passes at it so as to not gouge out huge chunks at once. Now with the base all trimmed up, you should sand all of the sprue and get things uniform. Be sure to spend a decent amount of time on the surface to get things roughly to the same height. If sanding doesn't get rid of the wrinkles, you should be able to cut any remaining flaws with your X-Acto knife. As with the previous videos, I recommend coming up with a color scheme for your floor that complements your models. However, in this case I went with a basic gray since that's what my previous Terminators have been on and I want them to match. So this is a do what I say, not what I do situation. Luckily we have other options when it comes to sprue thanks to its trapezoid shape. To create a hexagon floor tile, get a consistent section of sprue like before and using a blade, cut sections of the sprue at about 1/8 of an inch. Beware of cutting pieces too thin as they will tend to curl and won't be useful. Better to go thicker than thinner in this case. Once we have a decent amount of tiles, we start with gluing one face down anywhere on your base, then another in contact with the previous tile with the wide ends touching to create a hexagon. Continue creating hexagons in a continuous pattern, leaving a consistent small gap between each hexagon. Once the base is covered, we flip it over onto our cutting mat and we trim off the excess sprue with our X-Acto blade and file the rest. Once that's done, we sand down the top of the tiles until they're all a consistent height. Likewise, if your sprue comes in cylindrical rods, you can cut several plugs from it and glue them on the base, leaving a similar gap between them, then trim and sand the excess. With a floor done in a non-rectangular shape like these, you can do some odd color schemes that will feel more forgiving since they don't look typical of an urban setting. They have a more opulent or alien feel to them, so be sure to have some fun when coming up with a color scheme. It needs a lot of love to shine, but its availability and versatility makes sprue a great basing material on its own or combined with other materials. So next time you're finished assembling your next kit, be sure to think twice before you throw out that gray gold. Thank you for watching and keep an eye out for our next video in this series.